You should have an insert to your order of service. It looks a lot like the black and white version of the color gingerbread person that Nicole was just sharing with the children. This chart is a playful but serious attempt to visualize the spectrums of gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and sexual attraction. And one of the most important aspects of this chart is that there are 4 different spectrums and that they're on non-intersecting lines. In other words, where an individual is on one line does not tell you how they might identify on any of the other 3 lines. That also means there is a huge number of different combinations if you take all the different points that people could be at these 4 different lines. And at least speaking for myself, that seems pretty evident to me when I just look out into the world at the differences of the 7+ billion people. To give just a brief overview, if you start at the top of that chart, gender identity, as Nicole was talking about, that is in your mind. Internally, do you think of yourself more as a woman, as a man, or of somewhere in between, keeping in mind that our notions of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, depend a whole lot on the culture in which you were raised. Gender expression is that dotted line around the outside. Do you present yourself to others? What Nicole was talking about, your dress, your physical appearance. Do you present yourselves as more masculine, feminine, androgynous, or gender fluid? Again, keep in mind that our perceptions of categories like masculine and feminine are deeply socially constructed. A third category is attraction. In your heart, do you know that you are sexually and or romantically attracted more to men, males, and masculinity, or to women, females, and femininity, both or neither? Finally, there's a spectrum regarding biological sex, which is more complicated than whether your chromosomes are XY male or XX female. If you ask experts at medical centers how often a child is born with so noticeably atypical in terms of genitalia that a specialist in sex differentiation is called in, it's somewhere between 1 in 1,500 births and 1 in 2,000 births. But a lot more than that, people are born with subtler forms of sex anatomy variations, some of which won't show up until later in life. So what does this mean about being gendered here in the early 21st century? Although many forms still limit individuals to checking one of 2 boxes, either male or female in regard to gender, increasing numbers of people are identifying outside of a simple gender binary. More than 4 years ago, some of you who are on Facebook may have noticed that Facebook now has 50 custom gender options for describing one's gender presentation. The dating app Tinder, I hope you're not all on that, but you do. The dating app Tinder lists 37 gender options. Oregon, Maine, and Washington, D.C. already allow a 3rd gender category on driver's licenses, and more states likely to come. At least 10 countries, Australia, Bangladesh, Canada, Denmark, Germany, India, Malta, Nepal, New Zealand, and Pakistan already offer gender-neutral options on passports and national identity cards. I first began to reflect about these issues critically by reading the philosopher Judith Butler and her writings about gender performativity, the ways in which we learn to perform our gender. Similar to that genderbread person chart, Butler highlights that there's just not a simple link for everybody between knowing their biological sex and knowing their gender. Long before an individual can choose for themselves, however, and Nicole spoke about how that's starting to change with Target going to just having a toy section instead of a boys' toys and a girls' toys. But long before that, there are these whole industries in our society that are dedicated to encouraging biological girls to wear pink frilly dresses, to play with dolls and toy kitchens, and to express their emotions, except anger, right? Girls aren't supposed to be angry. Likewise, there's a similar social construct encouraging biological boys to wear pants and the color blue, to play with cars and tools, and to be tough and to control their emotions, except for anger. Yes, boys can be angry, disturbingly demonstrated this past week at our Supreme Court nomination hearings. The good news is there is a growing conversation about alternative ways forward. About 2 weeks ago, for instance, did you see the Washington Post article titled, "Was Their Child a Boy or a Girl? Naya's Parents Wanted to Let Naya Decide." Did you see that in the Post? I see a few hands out there. Naya's parents chose not to publicly share the sex listed on their child's birth certificate. You could arguably do this from the perspective of, my child's below the belt anatomy, it's a little creepy that you want to know. You could go there. They chose the more gentler to respectfully request, if you interact with our kid, please make an effort to just use Naya's name rather than a gendered pronoun. And they gave Naya clothes and toys from both sides of the gender-segregated aisles at most stores. Around age 3, Naya was playing with a totally gender non-specific stuffed animal and just brought up to her parents, "I think Doggy is a boy, a he, and that he should be called that." Sensing that this conversation might be more than just about a stuffed animal, Naya's parents said nonchalantly, asked gently, "Well, do you know what you want me to call you?" And Naya replied really nonchalantly, "Oh, she, her, and a girl." Even after that conversation, Naya's parents still don't talk about what is on Naya's birth certificate. Their hope is to continue to give Naya the freedom to explore and discover who she is. And they are open to more conversations in the future. There's actually a related article in the New York Times, of course probably triggered by the Washington Post. They have to ooh, we better do something on this topic. Just a few days ago, titled "Male, Female, or X: The Push for a Third Choice on Official Forms," that mentioned a gender-open playgroup in Brooklyn that includes 4 what they're calling not babies, but babies. So T-H-E-Y. And as excited as I am to see these signs of a more gender-liberated future, there are times the discussions around transgender awareness gives the misleading impression that these issues are new. So that term transgender, that prefix trans meaning across, different from one's biological sex. The antonym to that is cisgender, meaning same, so same gendered. So if you identify with the biological sex you're born with, you're cisgendered. If you don't, you're transgendered. And so sometimes there's this misleading impression that all of this is really new and we're having to deal with this here in the 21st century. I will limit myself to 3 quick jumps through history, but there's a lot more to say about this, but I want to let you hear Madison sing, so I'll limit myself to 3 quick examples. In the late 17th century, we have records of the colony of Massachusetts, so this is the 1600s. We have records of the colony of Massachusetts passing laws against cross-dressing. And you know what it means when people are passing laws against something? It means it was happening enough to people thought they had passed a law about it. Skipping to the 19th century, the 1800s, one major theme in first-wave feminism was asserting the rights of women to wear pants. It wasn't just about voting, it was definitely about women's suffrage, but you get these suffragettes arguing that long skirts and cumbersome undergarments are a form of bondage holding women back from reaching their full potential. Or looking to the 20th century, long before Caitlyn Jenner, I suspect at least some of you will remember that on December 1st, 1952, Christine Jorgensen made international headlines of her successful genital transformation surgery in Copenhagen. So in a year when hydrogen bombs were being tested in the Pacific, war was raging in Korea, England had crowned a new queen, Jonas Salk was working on the polio vaccine, if you look back, Christine Jorgensen was the most written about topic in 1953 in the media. This is not new. The movement for gender liberation has a long and fascinating history. Looking briefly to our own time, it's significant to note that in 2010, the U.S. Department of State issued a new passport policy, in effect allowing parents to change the legal gender of their minor children. And because passports are so-called breeder documents, they can be used to change state identification, school records, health records, and more. Endocrinologists now widely recommend puberty-inhibiting hormone therapies for transgender adolescents. Medicare has lifted its ban on coverage for transgender health care. In 2013, the fifth edition of Psychologist, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, debuted a new version of its clinical diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria, which limited the diagnosis to individuals that experience clinically significant distress about their gender differences, rather than saying all transgender people should be in the DSM, because some transgender people aren't distressed about being transgender. And they also separated gender into a category wholly apart from sexuality. As of last year, 13 states had enacted laws prohibiting discrimination based on gender identity or gender discrimination in schools, and hundreds of school districts around the country, including Frederick County, have instituted similar non-discrimination policies at a local level. Looking to the future, I'll move to my conclusion by naming 4 areas among many of potential change. I realize some of these are controversial. I'm going to go through them relatively quickly, but we have years to unpack these. So this is related to the gender liberation movement. The 4 are bathrooms, not a shock there, right? That's the ground zero for this debate. Identity documents, same-sex colleges, and athletics. So start with bathrooms. I suspect many of you have noticed this growing trend of gender-neutral bathrooms. It turns out they're just bathrooms, at least in my experience. It's fine. This trend may lead to a paradigm shift eventually toward a universal design in which most, if not all, new public bathrooms increasingly just have bathrooms in which human beings use them regardless of gender. Such a universal design would likely have walls of individual stalls extended all the way or close to the floor. One of the most immediate advantages of a universally accessible public bathroom would be to eliminate the disparity between very long lines at women's rooms and very short lines at men's rooms. Can I get an amen? Number 2, identity documents. Many cisgendered folks, so the opposite of transgender, are not aware of the long history of government officials harassing and abusing people who don't conform to the gender identity listed on their documents. There's been a really raising of awareness among white people of this phenomenon called driving while black. There's a very similar thing of trying to go through any sort of official government thing while being transgender and being subject to a lot of harassment and abuse. So as well as for anyone with any sort of libertarian instincts, it can be fairly easy to get behind supporting the argument that what's below your belt is not the government's business. Moreover, there's already a precedent for eliminating gender from official government identity forms, which is the civil rights movement blazed a very similar path for removing race markers from driver's licenses and other official documents. Same-sex colleges. In a more gender-liberated world, one way forward would be to rename same-sex colleges as historically men's colleges or historically women's colleges. And for instance, prospective students, regardless of sex identity, might be evaluated based on their personal commitments to something like, in the case of women's colleges, then institutional, what is your commitment to our institutional value to feminism, irrespective of your biological anatomy? 4th, athletics. While professional athletics might continue to be primarily gender segregated, it would be fairly easy to move toward more gender-inclusive teams for athletics at younger ages and less competitive fields of play. These sketches are only brief reflections of future possibilities, but regardless of how we decide to move forward collectively, I don't want us to miss the heart of the matter. In researching this sermon, 2 of the books I read had similar dedications. The first one, the author's dedication read, "For my kids." In the other book it said, "To all the kids who are different and the adults who ease their way." When the history of the gender liberation movement in our time is written, I hope to be among those unnamed people who helped ease the way for human beings seeking nothing more than the freedom to be their authentic self. Holding all of that in our heart, I will light our first candle of joys and sorrows for all those human beings out there seeking nothing more than to be their authentic self. You will then have a chance to come forward silently if you feel so led to light a candle of of joy or sorrow, of anything you're holding in your heart as we sing Spirit of Life in a few moments. But to frame this time, knowing that last week was incredibly difficult for many people, especially abuse survivors, I invite you to hear these words by my colleague, the Reverend Gretchen Haley. She writes, "We believe you, period. Your stories held too long in secret and shame, they're safe here. You are safe here to grieve or to rage, to reckon and reconcile, to return and restore. There is a place here for every part of you. Bodies and spirits, voices and breath, broken and beautiful, bitter and still refusing to give up hope. Don't let anyone tell you that the courageous storytelling from brave women like Dr. Christine Blasey Ford is for nothing. Don't let anyone tell you that. Her truth, like Anita Hill and so many before her, has given so many other people permission and power to share and stand in their truth and their experience. In this autumn light, there remains a path for beginning again. Do not hold back your heartbreak and do not hold back your joy. Your vision for the world that is already and also is not yet. Let every tender longing of your heart be an offering for this time, be an offering for yourself, be an offering for this community and the building here already of a new way. The will, the courage, the faith to be the leaders, the people, the parents, the friends, the citizens, the partners that our world and we need now. The work of justice continues. Let's sing together, Spirit of Life.